Welcome to the deep dive, and a very warm welcome specifically to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Friedberg.
Great to be diving in.
Absolutely. You've definitely landed in the right place if you're looking to, well, really get under the surface of some complex topics shaping our world, stuff that matters.
That's the goal. Cut through the noise.
Exactly. Offer you a shortcut to being genuinely well-informed. We sift through the sources, pull out the key bits, maybe even find a surprising fact or two.
And hopefully keep it engaging.
We try. Today, we're tackling a really crucial topic: family reunification for refugees in Europe.
Hugely important. It touches on international relations, humanitarian policy.
Yeah, international politics too, right?
Yeah.
Certainly relevant for listeners interested in Danish politics, for example. You asked us to delve into this, and honestly, the UNHCR excerpts we've got are fascinating.
And challenging. It's not straightforward.
Not at all. It's about the policies, yes, but also the real people, the families behind those policies, trying to find safety, rebuild their lives.
The human impact is immense.
Before we really jump in, though, just a quick note for you listening. You can subscribe to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Friedberg on Spotify.
It's just a small monthly fee.
And it genuinely helps us keep making these deep dives. Plus, you get access to extra episodes, digging even deeper into some of these world challenges.
And links right there in the description.
Okay, so let's start unpacking this. Family reunification. When you hear that phrase, you probably think, well, family, that's simple, right? And we all know what a family is.
You'd think so. Intuitively, yeah.
But the sources, the UNHCR material, makes it really clear that for refugees in Europe, the definition of family is, well, it's complicated. It's actually a major sticking point.
It really is.
Yeah.
That definition, or rather the lack of a universally applied one, is probably the first big hurdle.
So what's the fundamental constraint here? What's the starting point for how family gets defined legally in this whole process?
Well, it's fascinating and honestly quite problematic. The core legal piece is the EU's Family Reunification Directive, the FRD.
Right, the EU law meant to set common rules.
Exactly. It's meant to harmonize how non-EU citizens legally living in an EU country can bring family members over. But, and this is the big but,
The implementation varies.
hugely across the EU member states and also those EU plus countries like Norway, Switzerland, Liechtenstein that apply similar rules. It's all over the place.
So one directive, but not one approach. That sounds like a recipe for confusion, at least.
It creates a really fragmented landscape, yes. Now, the directive does set a baseline. There's a compulsory level.
Okay, so what's non-negotiable? Who must states reunite?
Without exception, member states have to include spouses and their minor children. So children under 18, that's the absolute floor.
The core nuclear family.
Precisely. That's meant to be protected. But often, that's where the broad agreement ends. It's a minimum, but for many states, it's also the maximum they'll easily recognize.
Ah, okay, so that baseline sounds solid, but then there's this other category, isn't there? Discretionary reunification.
Yes, and that's where things get really interesting and, well, inconsistent.
Who falls into that discretionary bucket? And what does discretionary actually mean in practice? Like, how much choice do states really have?
It means the directive allows states to include a wider group, but crucially, it doesn't force them to. This is where national policy really kicks in.
So who could be included?
Well, it could be unmarried partners, especially if it's a long-term proven relationship. It could be parents of adult refugees, so refugees over 18. That's a big one.
Yeah, I can see that being important.
Grandparents too. And really importantly, given the context, it also mentions other relatives who may have become part of the nuclear family due to death or displacement.
That sounds key, reflecting the reality of war and crisis where families change shape.
Exactly. People take in nieces, nephews, cousins. Family units shift out of necessity. The key factor for including these discretionary relatives is usually dependency. Does this person rely on the refugee sponsor in Europe for their basic needs?
So the law allows for this broader view,
Yeah.
and the European Commission, hasn't it actually pushed for states to use that flexibility to be more humanitarian?
Oh, absolutely. The Commission has been quite clear. They've actively encouraged states to use the full scope of the directive. They keep emphasizing interpreting it in the most humanitarian way.
So they're saying don't just stick to the bare minimum.
Pretty much. They've even pointed out that the relevant article doesn't restrict how distantly related other family members can be. They've specifically suggested considering people not biologically related, but who are cared for within the family unit.
Like foster children.
Foster children is the example they give, yes. It's a strong signal. Look at the reality of the family bond, not just the paperwork or biology.
Okay, here's where it gets really crucial then, because you have the commission saying, be broad, be humane, but the reality on the ground, it often looks very different, doesn't it? It sounds like many EU countries take a much narrower view.
That's the crux of it. The aspiration meets the reality, and often the reality is much more restrictive. Many EU member states interpret family very, very narrowly.
The bare minimum approach you mentioned.
Exactly. Our sources point to 5 EU plus states that restrict reunification only to spouses, minor children, and the parents of unaccompanied minors. That's it. The absolute minimum the directive forces them to do.
Which directly contradicts what the Commission is urging.
Directly. It shows how, despite the aim of harmonization, national politics, different views on migration, they lead to wildly different outcomes for people in desperate need. Europe isn't acting as one here. It's a patchwork.
So some states really draw the tightest possible circle, and I imagine that has especially harsh consequences for children, right? The most vulnerable.
Devastatingly so. Look at some specifics. Liechtenstein and the UK, our sources say unaccompanied children there have no right to family reunification at all.
None. A child alone has no way to bring family.
In those specific contexts, according to the source, no. And then Switzerland children there apparently don't have the right to reunify with parents or siblings who are abroad.
That's shocking. These seem like fundamental connections.
They are. These policies create massive barriers for kids who've often been through unimaginable trauma. It's not just legal, it's deeply psychological. It prolongs that agony of separation.
And even if someone technically fits the definition, there's the whole issue of proving it, right? Getting the documents. That must be incredibly hard when you're fleeing a war zone.
You've hit on another huge obstacle. The strict documentation requirements. Think about it. People running for their lives, maybe with just the clothes on their back. Official papers, birth certificates, marriage licenses, adoption records.
Often lost, destroyed, or maybe never existed in a formal way back home.
Exactly. So proving customary marriages, long-term relationships that weren't formally registered, non-biological ties like with foster kids or relatives taken in, it becomes almost impossible. The burden of proof is immense for people who've already lost everything.
Is there a story, an example from the sources that really shows the human cost of this, how these rules play out?
There is a really powerful one about a Syrian father, Ahmad. UNHCR documented his case. His extended family had taken in his 2 young nephews after their parents were killed in the war.
So a family expanded by tragedy and compassion.
Absolutely. Ahmad eventually made it to Austria, got protection. His wife and their 3 biological children were able to join him. The system worked for the core nuclear family.
That must have been a huge relief.
Immense. But the 2 nephews, who were clearly part of his actual family unit, dependent on him, they couldn't join.
Why not?
Simply because they hadn't been formally adopted under Austrian law. No official papers meant no recognition of that very real family bond.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. It just shows how bureaucracy can completely miss the human reality.
It's a stark example of that gap. Life-saving bonds, formed out of love and necessity, just not fitting the legal boxes. It fragments families needlessly.
It really drives it home. So if it's that tough for nephews or foster kids, what about siblings? That seems like such a natural family tie, especially for kids who might have lost parents. Is sibling reunification widely allowed?
You'd think it would be, logically and humanely. But again, the practical application falls short. The directive might cover siblings under dependency rules, but
states don't often apply it that way.
very rarely. Most member states just don't have explicit rules for it, or they define dependency so strictly it hardly ever applies between siblings.
So only a few countries actually make it possible.
Very few. The sources name just 8 EU plus states: Bulgaria, Croatia, Denmark, Finland, Ireland, Romania, Spain, and Sweden. Only those explicitly provide for sibling reunification.
Denmark is on that list then.
Yes, but even in those places, it's usually under tight conditions, clear dependency, medical reasons, things like that. So the vast majority of Europe, no clear path for siblings.
That must be crushing for orphan kids. Imagine losing your parents and them being kept apart from your brother or sister.
The impact is immense. Orphaned, unaccompanied children often can't reunite with siblings, even when it's obviously in their best interest. They lose that vital support system.
And what about older siblings who were maybe acting as parents?
Same problem. Young adults who became heads of household back home, looking after younger siblings, they often can't bring those dependent siblings with them. UNHCR is really pushing other countries to adopt a more positive approach seen in places like Denmark and Sweden.
And for unaccompanied kids trying to join other relatives like aunts or uncles, if parents are gone, is that even harder?
It is, very much so. Again, the directive has provisions,
Yeah.
but the practical challenge is proving prior custody or legal guardianship.
Which is near impossible in a crisis zone without records.
Exactly. And while preventing trafficking is a valid concern, UNHCR argues states need to find practical ways to uphold the child's right to reunite without these impossible demands.
It seems like the system isn't flexible enough for the realities.
And another point, even if an unaccompanied child can join their parents, there is often no provision for older siblings, say over 18, to join at the same time, even if they're still dependent on the parents. More flexibility there would help keep families together.
So it's not just who counts as family, but also when that family formed. What about people who meet and marry after arriving in Europe?
That's another significant hurdle, yes.
Yeah.
The directive allows states to limit reunification only to relationships that existed before the person entered the EU.
But people rebuild their lives. They meet people, fall in love, have kids.
Of course, it's natural.
Yeah.
But the reality is 13 EU plus states, a big chunk, restrict reunification to relationships formed before entry or even before leaving their home country.
So a refugee could find safety, build a new family, but that new family might be barred from joining them. That seems incredibly unfair.
It creates an impossible choice, doesn't it? Between the safety you found and the new family you built, it essentially freezes your right to family life at the moment you fled.
Wow. So if you put all these definitional issues together, who counts, proving it, when the family formed, it sounds like the very idea of family is used to create multiple barriers.
Absolutely. These narrow interpretations, applied differently across Europe, fundamentally fragment lives. They force awful choices, prolong trauma, and really hinder someone's ability to integrate and contribute. It undermines the whole idea of the unified European approach and arguably the basic human right to family life.
Okay, so let's say somehow a family does fit the narrow legal definition. They clear that first hurdle. But that's just the start, isn't it? Then comes the actual process of applying, and it sounds like that's a whole other nightmare.
It really is. Getting the yes on paper is one thing. Actually navigating the bureaucracy to make it happen, that's often where families hit a wall. It's less a process, more a gauntlet.
A bureaucratic maze, you called it. What are the biggest obstacles there?
Two massive ones jump out from the sources. Accessing embassies, which can be incredibly difficult, and the prohibitive costs involved. People talk about the embassy desert.
Embassy desert, that paints a picture. What does it mean in practice?
It means getting to the right embassy to even submit your application can be a huge, dangerous undertaking. Refugees often lack passports or visas needed for international travel.
Right.
So think about Syria. The sources say only 2 out of 32 EU plus states currently have a working embassy in Damascus.
Only 2. So for almost everyone else, Syrians can't even apply in Syria.
Correct. Most Syrian families have to travel to a neighboring country, Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, Iraq, just to apply to join family in, say, Germany or Sweden.
Which involves crossing borders, needing visas they might not be able to get.
Exactly. Plus, the protection risks dangerous journeys, potential exploitation, and it's usually not just one trip. Procedures often require multiple visits to that embassy in the neighboring country.
Multiplying the cost, the danger.
Enormously, especially for vulnerable people, female-headed households, for example. The lack of resources, the safety concerns of traveling alone with kids through difficult regions is a massive barrier.
And it's not just Syria.
No, the Iraqi example is similar. 18 EU plus states apparently have no embassy in Baghdad. So Iraqi families face the same impossible journeys. It makes the legal right almost meaningless if you can't physically access the process.
And then there's something called the legal residence trap. That sounds particularly bad.
It's brutal. The source calls it an insurmountable barrier for many. Some EU plus countries require the applicant, the family member abroad, to have legal residence in the country where they're applying.
Wait, so if your family is in Syria and the embassy for the country they want to reach is in Jordan, they have to go to Jordan and get legal residency there first.
Yes, often for 6 months or more before they can even start or continue the family reunification application.
That's absurd. You're forcing refugees into limbo in a third country just to apply to join family in a fourth country.
It's an extraordinary bureaucratic hurdle. It means prolonged separation, huge costs, immense uncertainty. It essentially creates a secondary displacement.
Is there an example of this in action, a story that shows what this actually means for people?
Yes. The story of Amira, a 43-year-old Syrian woman. She and her 2 daughters were trying to join her husband in Germany.
Okay.
Because there was no functioning German embassy in Syria accessible to them, they had to travel. Their route took them to Pristina, Kosovo.
Kosovo. That seems an unlikely detour.
Exactly. But that's where they could access the German embassy process.
Hmm.
And they weren't just passing through. They were forced to stay in Pristina for 8 months.
8 months, just waiting to apply.
Just to navigate the embassy procedures. It highlights the completely unexpected, costly, and prolonged ordeals families are forced into simply because of where embassies are located and these residence rules. It turns applying into an endurance test.
It really sounds like the system itself becomes the deterrent. And beyond embassy access and residence traps, what about the actual travel documents, the visas to make the final journey?
Another layer of difficulty. Even if you get through the embassy process, getting the final travel documents and visas is hard. Refugees often lack standard passports, and very few European countries will issue a visa upon arrival, even if someone has a legitimate alternative travel document, like a laissez-passer from the Red Cross or the UN.
So even with approval and a travel document, you could still be blocked at the border.
It can happen. It's like a catch-22. The system designed for regular travel just doesn't work well for people fleeing conflict without standard paperwork.
This sounds incredibly bleak. Are there any proposed solutions, any signs of hope, or examples of things working better somewhere?
Yes, thankfully. There are calls for change and some good practices that show it can be done more humanely. The European Commission itself has called on states to be more flexible.
What are they suggesting?
Things like recognizing emergency travel documents from the ICRC or UN Convention travel documents more consistently. Issuing one-way laissez-passer documents to simplify travel.
And visas on arrival.
Yes, offering the possibility of issuing a visa upon arrival, especially when getting documents beforehand, is just impossible for the family members.
And UNHCR, our main source here, they're echoing this.
Strongly. They're urging states to use these alternative mechanisms, UN documents, ICRC documents, when national passports aren't available or accepted. It's about finding pragmatic ways to facilitate a right, not blocking it with impossible requirements.
Makes sense. Are there any countries actually doing things better? Putting these ideas into practice?
There are some positive examples, yes. Estonia, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, for instance, allow the application to be lodged either by the sponsor already in Europe or by the family members abroad.
Oh, that sounds much more sensible. Reduces the burden on those still in danger.
Significantly. Luxembourg even lets people apply via Belgian embassies if there's no Luxembourg embassy nearby.
Yeah.
It puts the admin burden where it's safer.
What about the sponsor starting the process?
That's another good practice, used in Bulgaria, Italy, Poland, Portugal, Spain, and Switzerland. The sponsor in Europe submits the application first. Family abroad still need to go to an embassy later for identity checks, visas, etc., but it can reduce the number of risky trips they need to make.
Streamlines it a bit. And what about using other European embassies? If there's no Finnish embassy, could you go to a Swedish one?
Yes, that inter-embassy facilitation is crucial. Besides Luxembourg, Estonia, Finland, and Spain allow this in some form. It offers vital flexibility for people stuck in that embassy desert. It's practical European cooperation making a real difference.
So these examples show it is possible to make the process less of an ordeal.
Exactly. They show that policy exists, but the operational hurdles are often the real killer. And relatively small administrative changes letting the sponsor apply first, using other embassies, can have a massive positive impact on families suffering through separation.
It really makes you wonder then, if these better ways exist, why aren't they the standard everywhere?
That's the profound question, isn't it? Why aren't these good practices universal if they clearly work better and reduce suffering? It points to perhaps a lack of political will or maybe just systemic inertia. The blueprint for a more humane system is there, but it's not being widely adopted.
Okay, one final piece to this complex puzzle. We need to talk about people granted subsidiary protection. That's a different status to refugee, right? And it seems to add another layer of difficulty for family reunification.
It does, yes. It's a key distinction in European asylum law. Subsidiary protection is for people who don't strictly meet the 1951 Refugee Convention definition, maybe no direct personal persecution, but who would still face serious harm if sent back home.
Like from indiscriminate violence in a war.
Exactly. Or risk of torture, inhumane treatment. They can't safely return, even if they aren't convention refugees.
So what does that mean for their families? How does this status affect reunification?
The key phrase from the source is delayed and more limited access. Compared to convention refugees, people with subsidiary protection often face longer waiting periods before they can even apply for family reunification.
Years sometimes.
It can be years, yes. And the definition of family they can apply for might be narrower, perhaps excluding adult children or dependent parents that a refugee could bring. They might also face extra hurdles, stricter criteria. It clearly flags this status as another significant barrier.
So more waiting, more uncertainty, potentially fewer family members allowed. That must add so much anxiety. Is there an anecdote for this too?
There is the story of Abdi, a young man from Somalia. It really brings home the human cost. He was only 15 when he got to Europe.
15? What happened to him?
He'd been kidnapped by rebels back home, forced to flee for his life. He made a terrible journey. Ethiopia, Turkey, Greece, Italy, finally reaching Austria to claim asylum.
And all that time while he's waiting for a decision on his status?
He was desperately trying to find out what happened to his mother, his brothers, his sisters. He'd lost all contact when he fled Somalia. Imagine that fear, that not knowing, for a boy alone.
Utterly terrifying.
And his eventual status, whether he got full refugee status or subsidiary protection, would directly impact how quickly, and even if, he could reunite with any family he found. It just underscores the terrible psychological burden of these delays and limitations, especially for young people who've already been through hell. It hinders their recovery, their integration, everything.
Wow. Okay, so summing this all up, what we've really unpacked today is just how layered the challenges are for refugee family reunification in Europe. It's not one single problem.
No, it's a cascade.
First, the very definition of family is often interpreted incredibly narrowly, creating barriers right at the start.
Often excluding people who are clearly family in reality.
Then, even if you fit the definition, you face this massive bureaucratic and financial struggle just to access an embassy, sometimes involving dangerous detours and impossible residency requirements.
The embassy desert and the legal residence trap.
And finally, even your specific protection status, like subsidiary protection, can lead to significant delays and further limitations.
Adding another layer of hardship.
It really paints a picture of a system that, maybe despite good intentions on paper, often ends up keeping families apart and prolonging suffering.
What's really striking, I think, is how this mix of laws, national choices, and sheer practical barriers creates this reality. It makes you question how these varied approaches across Europe really square with fundamental human rights principles, especially the right to family life. And what does it say about genuine international cooperation when the system makes it so hard for people to follow legal paths to safety and togetherness? It's a deep tension.
A tension that leaves so many families in limbo. We really hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a much clearer picture and maybe some aha moments about this vital area of international relations and policy, including how it plays out in specific national contexts like Denmark's approach to siblings. Thank you so much for joining us on the deep dive.
Thank you.
If you found this valuable, if it made you think, please do follow Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiburg wherever you get your podcasts.
It really helps us keep doing this.
It does. And if you have a spare moment, leaving a 5-star rating helps other people interested in these crucial global issues find the deep dives. We honestly appreciate your support.